the boy in the window seat. The terminal buzzed with the weary rhythm of travel. Rolling suitcases, flight announcements, murmurs of impatience that filled the air like static. Among the crowd of polished shoes and pressed suits, a thin boy stood near the window, his reflection merging with the departing planes outside. His name was Malik Carter, 12 years old, quiet, and small for his age, but with eyes that carried the kind of depth only hardship could carve. His sneakers were scuffed, his jeans patched in places where the fabric had given up long ago, and his backpack, faded blue and one strap torn, was pressed tightly against his chest. Inside it were his entire world's possessions: a peanut butter sandwich wrapped in foil, a water bottle half full, and a folded photograph of his mother smiling weakly from a hospital bed in Chicago. He kept glancing at the boarding pass in his trembling hands as though it were something sacred. Flight 226 to Denver, seat 24C. It was the first time he had ever been on an airplane, the first time he had ever left the city alone. His grandmother had hugged him that morning, her eyes glassy but strong. "Go see your mama," she had said softly. "She's waiting on you. Don't be scared of the sky, child. The Lord rides the winds, too." Those words stayed in his heart, a fragile bit of warmth against the chill of the airport's air conditioning and the cold stares from people who looked through him like he wasn't there. The loudspeaker crackled with a new boarding announcement. Malik adjusted his backpack and moved closer to the line, his sneakers squeaking on the polished floor. He noticed how easily others moved, how the men in tailored suits chatted confidently into phones, how mothers balanced strollers and handbags with practiced grace, how children his age carried tablets that glowed with games he'd only seen through store windows. He tried not to stare, tried not to think about the $3 tucked in his pocket, every penny his grandmother could spare. The airport felt like another world, a place built for people who had forgotten what hunger felt like. Then the crowd's hum shifted, like a breeze changing direction. Heads turned, phones lifted discreetly. A tall man in an immaculate gray suit strode toward the gate with a baby carrier balanced on one arm and a personal assistant scurrying behind him. The man looked like someone who owned the air he breathed, his posture crisp, his shoes glossy, his watch worth more than Malik's entire building. He was Adrian Vale, a billionaire tech investor whose face sometimes appeared on the news when he donated money to hospitals or opened new companies. But here, stripped of the stage lights and headlines, he looked tired and human, though still guarded by the invisible armor of wealth. The assistant, a woman in her 40s clutching a tablet, spoke hurriedly. "Mr. Vale, are you certain you don't want me accompanying you? The summit in Denver can be rescheduled." Adrian shook his head, his voice tight but polite. "It's fine, Melissa. I'll handle it. It's just a few hours." He adjusted the baby carrier awkwardly. Inside, his infant son squirmed, letting out a small whimper that hinted at the storm to come. "You have the file for the Larkson merger?" "Yes, sir. Everything's in your inbox. The board will meet virtually at 4. "Good. Go back to the office. I'll be in touch." The woman hesitated, glancing at the baby whose restless legs kicked at the expensive fabric. "He's been fussy all morning, sir." "Maybe. I'll manage." Adrian's tone closed the discussion. Malik watched them move to the priority line, the billionaire commanding space simply by existing. The flight attendants smiled extra wide, passengers whispered in recognition. Malik shifted uncomfortably. He had seen men like that on television, people who seemed untouchable, who talked about empathy but never stepped foot in the neighborhoods where streetlights flickered out by midnight. To Malik, Adrian Vale belonged to another universe, one where even tears cost money. When boarding began, Malik waited for his group to be called. He shuffled down the jet bridge, heart pounding with the rhythm of engines outside. The cabin smelled of coffee, perfume, and something sterile. He found his seat, 24C, an aisle near the back, and pushed his bag beneath the seat in front of him. Around him, strangers settled into their worlds. A woman applying lipstick in her reflection, a man opening a laptop before the seatbelt light even blinked, and 2 teenagers giggling into their phones. Up in first class, Adrian Vale took his seat near the window. His baby Lucas was starting to fuss again. The flight attendant offered a warm smile. "Can I help you with the carrier, Mr. Vale?" "I've got it," Adrian said curtly, fumbling with the straps. The carrier buckle refused to click. The baby squirmed harder, Finally, the attendant stepped in with gentle efficiency, securing the seat with a reassuring click. Adrian nodded a stiff thank you. The plane filled quickly, the overhead bins slamming shut like a sequence of locks. Malik pressed his forehead to the window, staring at the tarmac lights, trying to quiet the nervous flutter inside him. He missed his mother already. He remembered her soft voice on the phone just days before. "I'm proud of you, baby. I'm getting better. Come soon." Her words were thin, weak, but filled with love that reached across miles. He didn't care that the hospital smelled like bleach and sadness. He just wanted to see her face again. Then came the first cry. It was small at first, a tiny sound that barely pierced the air. But within minutes it swelled into a scream, a raw, relentless wail that seemed to echo through every corner of the aircraft. The baby's cry was not ordinary. It was sharp, full of panic. Passengers groaned. Some turned around with irritated sighs. Others muttered under their breath. The man beside Malik rolled his eyes. First class or not, babies shouldn't be allowed on planes. Malik looked up, heart tugging. He recognized that sound. It wasn't just noise, it was pain. Gas pain, maybe, or the sharp discomfort from cabin pressure. He'd heard it before in the infants he helped at his building when mothers worked late shifts. But no one asked a poor kid's opinion here. Adrian tried everything. Bottle, pacifier, plush toy. But Lucas only screamed louder. The billionaire's jaw clenched. Sweat gathered near his temple. The more he bounced the baby, the more the child fought him. The attendants tried to assist, but Adrian waved them off with a brittle smile that barely hid his rising frustration. The baby's cries cut through every sound. The captain's voice, the hum of engines, the clatter of coffee cups. Passengers began to whisper louder. A woman in pearls complained to her husband. "Honestly, can't they control that child? People pay thousands for peace up here." A businessman across the aisle scoffed. "Money can buy everything except parenting skills." Malik shrank into his seat, shame burning on behalf of someone else. The noise of judgment was louder than the crying now. The flight attendants kept their smiles frozen, and even the captain's announcements carried an edge of strain. When the plane lifted off, Lucas's screams turned almost desperate. His little fists flailed. His cheeks flushed red. Adrian's composure cracked. He stared down at his son with helplessness foreign to him. He was a man who negotiated billion-dollar contracts, commanded boardrooms, and lectured on leadership. Yet here, with a 6-month-old baby screaming in his arms, he looked utterly powerless. Malik couldn't take it anymore. His grandmother's words echoed, "If you see someone hurting, you don't wait for permission to be kind." He unbuckled his seatbelt quietly, stood, and made his way up the aisle. Every head turned. Whispers trailed behind him like ripples in water. He stopped beside Adrian's seat. The billionaire looked up sharply, eyes tired, expression wary. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice curt from exhaustion. Malik hesitated, then spoke softly. "I can calm your baby, sir." A stunned silence spread through first class. Passengers stared. A teenage girl stifled a laugh. The man in pearls snorted. "This should be good." Adrian blinked, disbelief flickering across his face. "You, what?" "I can help him," Malik repeated, his voice firm though his hands trembled slightly. "Please, just trust me for 1 minute." The baby's scream reached another painful pitch, forcing Adrian to flinch. For a long moment, pride and desperation wrestled behind his eyes. Finally, he sighed, the fight draining from his shoulders. "If you think you can, go ahead." Malik reached out carefully. The billionaire hesitated, then, as if surrendering to something he didn't understand, handed Lucas over. The passengers watched, curiosity replacing mockery. Malik held the infant with practiced ease, shifting his weight until the baby rested against his chest. He began to sway gently. Not the frantic bouncing of panic, but a slow, steady rhythm like waves against sand. Then he hummed, low and melodic. The sound was soft but full, a vibration that carried warmth instead of noise. His grandmother's lullaby, wordless, timeless, older than any song on the radio. Within seconds, Lucas's cries faltered. His body softened. The red in his cheeks began to fade. A few minutes later, the impossible happened, silence. The entire first-class cabin froze. The man in pearls dropped his jaw slightly. The blonde woman who had laughed earlier covered her mouth. The baby, once inconsolable, now rested peacefully against Malik's chest. Tiny fingers curled around the boy's worn shirt. Adrian's eyes widened, awe pushing aside every ounce of disbelief. How did you do that? Malik didn't look up. You listen, he murmured. Babies talk different, not with words but with feeling. You have to listen with your heart. He rocked gently, his humming fading into the quiet hum of the plane's engines. The baby sighed once, then drifted into deep sleep. For the first time since boarding, Adrian exhaled fully, his entire body relaxing. The passengers exchanged looks, some embarrassed, some moved. The flight attendant wiped at her eyes discreetly. Adrian reached out, touching his son's tiny hand, then looked at Malik with something new in his gaze. Respect, maybe even gratitude. What's your name, son? He asked softly. Malik, the boy said. Malik Carter. Well, Malik, Adrian said, voice thick with emotion. You just did something that money couldn't. Malik only smiled faintly, still swaying gently with the baby in his arms. Sometimes, he said quietly, you don't need money to understand love. And for the rest of that flight, a billionaire sat in humbled silence while a poor boy from a broken neighborhood held his crying child and taught an entire cabin the one lesson no wealth could ever buy: compassion. When the sky landed on Earth, the soft chime of the seatbelt sign signaled descent, and the once noisy cabin was now blanketed in a hushed awe. The same passengers who had scoffed and mocked now avoided Malik's eyes, as if his calm presence had reminded them of something uncomfortable, their own impatience, perhaps, or the quiet shame of having judged a child who had shown more grace than all their wealth combined. Malik didn't notice. His entire focus was on the small sleeping baby in his arms, the rhythmic rise and fall of the infant's chest syncing with the slow beat of his heart. The hum of the engines blended with his fading lullaby, and for those last few minutes before the plane touched down, the world seemed softer, slower, and far more human. Adrian Vale sat across from him, hands folded, gaze fixed not on his phone or his watch but on his son and the boy holding him. It was strange, how in a single hour everything he thought he knew about control had unraveled. He had built empires, bought companies, and commanded thousands. But the universe had humbled him with something so small, so fragile, that all his logic and leadership were useless. He thought of how he had looked at Malik when the boy first approached, seeing only poverty, not personhood. He realized how blind that was. He had mistaken quiet for weakness, modest clothes for insignificance, yet here was this boy guiding him in the one thing he could not buy: peace. When the wheels kissed the runway, the cabin erupted in polite applause. The kind passengers offered out of habit more than gratitude. But this time it felt different. There was relief in it, a kind of release from something larger than turbulence. Malik gently stirred the baby awake, whispering softly as the little one blinked in drowsy confusion. Hey now, he murmured. We're back on the ground, little man. You did so good. The passengers began to disembark. Some stopped by Malik's seat, offering awkward smiles or muttered apologies disguised as compliments. The businessman who had once scoffed cleared his throat and said, "Good job, kid," before hurrying away. The woman in pearls hesitated, then handed Malik a small chocolate bar from her purse. For the flight home, she said, not meeting his eyes. Malik nodded shyly. He didn't need their apologies, he hadn't done it for them anyway. Adrian lingered behind as the cabin emptied. He carefully unbuckled the carrier, adjusting Lucas with newfound gentleness. The baby, calm and curious now, reached for his father's tie, tugging with innocent fascination. Adrian laughed softly, the sound strange in his own ears. He hadn't laughed since before Jaime, his late wife, had died giving birth. That laughter cracked something open inside him, like a window in a room that had been sealed too long. He turned to Malik. You're traveling alone, aren't you? Adrian asked quietly as they stepped into the jet bridge. Malik nodded, tightening his grip on his backpack. Yes, sir. Going to see my mama. She's in the hospital in Chicago. Something flickered across Adrian's face, guilt mixed with admiration. You're very brave, he said. Does she know you're coming? She's expecting me, Malik said. I told her I'd come soon as I could. Grandma helped me save for the ticket. He didn't add that it had taken almost a year, washing cars, running errands, collecting spare change in a jar labeled for Mama. The flight had been his miracle, his one-way promise. Adrian adjusted his baby and followed Malik through the terminal. His usual airport escort team waited beyond security. 3 assistants and a driver in a tailored black suit holding a sign that read, Vale Industries. They moved forward when they saw him, ready to sweep him away into comfort and silence. But Adrian didn't move toward them. His eyes were on Malik, who now stood in the middle of the arrivals hall, small against the flood of people, clutching his backpack as though afraid to breathe wrong. "Do you have someone meeting you here?" Adrian asked, his tone shifting from curiosity to concern. Malik shook his head. "No, sir. I'm catching the 5 p.m. bus to Chicago." "The bus?" Adrian's brows furrowed. "That's almost 12 hours. "Yes, sir," Malik said simply, as if 12 hours of discomfort was nothing compared to the joy waiting at the end of it. "It's cheaper. Grandma says blessings don't come easy. You gotta earn them with patience." Adrian was silent for a moment. He was used to people quoting success books and investment theories, not faith and patience. The boy's words lingered in his mind. Finally, he spoke. "Come with me," Malik froze. "Sir?" Adrian gestured toward the private terminal exit where his car waited. "It's late and the bus station's rough after dark." "Let me take you to the train station. You'll get there faster and it's safer." Malik hesitated, torn between trust and pride. "You don't have to, sir. I can manage, I know," Adrian said gently. "But sometimes accepting help is just as brave as giving it." The words carried weight. Malik studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Okay." They walked side by side through the terminal, the billionaire and the boy drawing curious glances from passers-by who could not understand what invisible thread connected them. Outside, the evening air was crisp, the sunset painting the sky in hues of gold and violet. The chauffeur opened the door of a sleek black sedan. Malik hesitated before climbing in, his eyes wide as he sank into the soft leather seat. He had never been inside a car that didn't rattle or smell of gasoline. As they drove, the city lights flickered to life, stretching endlessly in every direction. Lucas cooed softly in his car seat beside them, playing with the strap of Malik's backpack. Adrian watched quietly, noting how the boy instinctively reached over to soothe the baby when he fussed. "You're good with him," Adrian said. Malik smiled faintly. "Babies are simple. They just need love even when they can't ask for it." He turned to look out the window. "My grandma says that's true for grown-ups too. They just get better at hiding when they need it." The truth of that hit Adrian like a whisper he hadn't known he needed. He thought of all the nights he'd sat alone in his penthouse, pretending grief was just another problem to outthink. But grief didn't listen to logic. It waited in the quiet like a shadow that never left. As they neared the train station, Malik turned to him. "Thank you, sir. For the ride." Adrian nodded, but something in him resisted letting the boy go. "Do you have money for the ticket?" Malik blinked, startled. "Yes, sir. I've got enough." "How much?" $42, Malik admitted, voice small. "That's for the train and food." Adrian opened his wallet. Malik instantly shook his head. "No, sir. I can't take that." Adrian smiled faintly. "It's not charity, Malik, it's gratitude. You gave me something I didn't know I'd lost. The chance to feel like a father again." He pressed a crisp $100 bill into the boy's hand. "Consider it a thank you from Lucas." Malik stared at the money as if it burned. "Sir, I didn't do it for—" "I know," Adrian interrupted softly. "That's exactly why you deserve it." For a long moment they just sat there, the billionaire and the boy, each understanding the other in a way words couldn't quite explain. Malik finally accepted the money, tucking it carefully inside his backpack beside his mother's photo. "I'll make it count," he promised quietly. As Malik stepped out of the car, Lucas suddenly began to cry again. Adrian's instinct was to panic, but then he remembered the pattern. The gentle sway, the hum, the closeness to the heartbeat. He lifted his son and followed the motions Malik had taught him. To his astonishment, it worked. Within moments, the baby relaxed, resting his tiny head against Adrian's chest. Adrian looked up just in time to see Malik glance back one last time through the car window, smiling when he saw Lucas calm. "See?" Malik called softly. "You got it now." Adrian smiled back, a lump rising in his throat. "Safe travels, Malik Carter." The boy waved, then disappeared into the station, swallowed by the crowd and the neon glow. For a long time, Adrian sat there, unable to drive away. He looked down at his son and whispered, "I hope you grow up with a heart like his." As the city lights flickered outside, something inside Adrian shifted, a promise, silent but powerful, that this would not be the last time their paths crossed. Because sometimes fate doesn't end when the plane lands. Sometimes it's only just taking off. The promise that wouldn't fade. The weeks that followed that fateful flight felt like two different worlds living under the same sky. For Malik, life in Chicago's South Side rolled back into its familiar rhythm. The cracked sidewalks, the groaning buses, the hum of sirens that sang through the night like ghosts. Yet something inside him had changed. The world didn't seem as heavy as it once did. Every time he closed his eyes, he remembered that moment on the plane. Not the faces of the rich passengers who stared, but the tiny heartbeat he had calmed, and the man who had looked at him not as a poor boy but as someone who mattered. It was strange, that memory. It warmed him on cold nights when the power flickered out, and it whispered strength into him when the hospital called to say his mother's condition had worsened again. Every morning, Malik woke before sunrise and walked to the corner store to stock shelves before school. After classes, he worked at the church daycare, rocking babies to sleep for a few dollars an hour. The sound of crying no longer bothered him. He understood it. He understood what fear sounded like, what loneliness felt like, and how a soft hum could quiet both. Each night when he sat beside his mother's hospital bed, he told her stories about the flight, how the baby had smiled, how the rich man had thanked him, how kindness could still reach through the walls of money and pride. His mother would smile weakly, brushing a trembling hand over his cheek. "You've got a gift, baby," she'd whisper. "Don't you ever let this world tell you otherwise." Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away in a towering glass office in New York, Adrian Vale found himself thinking about that same boy far more often than he expected. He had returned to the world of deadlines and investors, where meetings were battles and time was currency. But no matter how many deals he signed, no matter how many rooms he commanded, the memory of that flight stayed with him like an echo he couldn't silence. He remembered the look in Malik's eyes, calm, knowing, wise beyond years, and he remembered how those small hands had done what all his wealth and expertise could not, brought peace to his child. At first, Adrian tried to shake it off. He told himself it was just a rare moment of humility, something to learn from and move on. But every time Lucas cried, and every time he used Malik's gentle figure-8 motion or the humming technique, he felt that boy's spirit guiding him. It was more than gratitude now. It was something deeper, like a silent tether that connected their lives through invisible threads of compassion. Weeks turned into months. Lucas grew stronger, smiling more, sleeping better. Adrian found himself talking to his son differently, softer, more patient, as though he was trying to make up for every moment of fear and absence since the day his wife died. The board members noticed too. "You seem lighter," his assistant Melissa commented one morning, handing him his coffee. "Different somehow." Adrian smiled faintly. "Maybe I'm learning what really matters," but something kept nagging at him. He had thanked Malik that night, yes, given him money, a ride, kind words. Yet it felt incomplete, almost hollow. The boy had given him more than peace for a crying child. He had reminded him of humanity, stripped of status and judgment. He had reminded him of Jaime, his late wife, who had always believed that love was measured not by wealth, but by how much of yourself you were willing to give away. And the more he thought about it, the more he realized he couldn't just let that moment disappear like a passing dream. He needed to find Malik again, not to pay him, not to patronize him, but to honor what that boy had unknowingly taught him. The search wasn't easy. Malik hadn't given his last name or address. All Adrian remembered was Malik Carter, Chicago, and his mother's hospital. But money wasn't the only thing Adrian had. He had persistence, and more importantly, he had intention. Within weeks, his personal assistant traced the flight records and found that an unaccompanied minor named Malik Carter had boarded Flight 226 from Atlanta to Denver and transferred to Chicago on a bus. From there, they located the hospital where his mother was being treated. When Adrian read the report, his chest tightened. Her name was Angela Carter, age 36, single mother, diagnosed with stage 3 heart failure. The hospital notes mentioned she was awaiting a transplant, but had been moved to a long-term care unit due to lack of funds. The last entry was dated 3 weeks ago. Condition stable but deteriorating. Adrian closed the file slowly, his throat tight. He looked at the photo attached, a woman with tired eyes but a kind smile, holding a boy who couldn't have been more than 8 at the time. Malik's eyes were the same in that picture, steady, hopeful, full of quiet strength. He made his decision right then. "Book me a flight to Chicago," he told his assistant. "And make sure it's tonight." The drive from the airport to the Southside Hospital felt longer than any flight he'd taken. The streets told a story of forgotten promises: graffiti-covered walls, corner stores with flickering lights, children playing in cracked alleys as if joy refused to die here. When the car stopped, Adrian stepped out, the wind carrying the scent of rain and asphalt. He wasn't sure what he expected: gratitude, surprise, maybe even rejection. But he knew he had to go. Inside, the hospital hallways were quiet, lined with fading paint and the faint hum of machines that kept fragile lives breathing. The nurse at the front desk looked up as he approached. "I'm here to see Angela Carter," Adrian said, his voice steady but low. The nurse checked the chart, then smiled faintly. "Room 213, she's resting now. Her boy's probably there, he never leaves." When Adrian reached the door, he paused. Through the small glass window, he saw Malik sitting beside his mother's bed, head bowed, softly humming a tune that filled the sterile air with warmth. It was the same lullaby from the plane, the same sound that had calmed his son. Adrian's throat tightened. He watched as Angela stirred weakly, her eyes fluttering open to smile at her boy. That moment, pure, quiet, and human, broke something inside him. He knocked gently. Malik looked up, startled, his eyes widening in disbelief. "Mr. Vale?" Adrian smiled softly, stepping inside. "Hey, Malik." He glanced at Angela. "I hope I'm not intruding." Angela looked between them, confusion mixing with curiosity. "Malik, baby, who's this?" This is the man from the plane, Mama," Malik said, rising from his chair. "The one with the baby." Angela's eyes softened with recognition. "You're the one he helped." Adrian nodded slowly. "Yes, ma'am." "He did more than that, though. He helped me find myself again." There was a long silence, the kind that doesn't need words. Then Angela spoke, her voice fragile but sincere. "You raised a good boy, ma'am," Adrian said quietly. Angela smiled faintly. "I tried. The world's been hard, but God's been good. He sends people when we least expect them." Adrian sat beside her bed, feeling something he hadn't felt in years. Humility that burned, not from shame, but from reverence. "I came to thank you," he said, looking at Malik, "and to ask if I can help." Angela's hand trembled as she reached for her son's. "We're fine," she whispered. "We always make it work." But Adrian shook his head. "You've done enough. Let someone else help now." He pulled a small envelope from his jacket and placed it on the bedside table. "This isn't charity. It's gratitude. It's what your son gave me that day. Hope." Malik stared at him, emotion clouding his voice. "Sir, you don't have to." "I know," Adrian said softly. "But sometimes when life shows you an angel, the least you can do is help him fly." Angela's eyes glistened with tears. She turned to her son. "See, baby? Kindness circles back. Always." That night, as Adrian left the hospital, rain began to fall, slow and gentle, washing the city in silver. He looked up, feeling the drops touch his skin, and for the first time in years, he didn't rush for cover. Somewhere between the hum of hospital machines and the memory of a poor boy's lullaby, he had rediscovered what his late wife used to call the heartbeat of humanity. And as the car pulled away from the curb, Adrian knew this wasn't the end of their story. It was only the beginning of something far greater, a promise that he would keep no matter what. The gift of tomorrow. The rain had stopped by dawn, leaving the city slick and quiet, as if the heavens themselves had wept away the night's weariness. In the small hospital room where Hope had been fighting for space against the beeping machines, Malik sat watching the light crawl across the linoleum floor. His mother was still asleep, her chest rising slowly beneath the thin blanket. The envelope the billionaire had left sat unopened on the table beside her, the edges damp from where Malik's fingers had held it through the night. He hadn't dared to open it. Money to him always came with strings, and invisible but heavy. He didn't want to owe anyone anything, not even kindness, because kindness in his world often turned into pity. But this felt different. Adrian Vale hadn't looked at him with the eyes of someone doing charity. He had looked at him with something purer, recognition, maybe even gratitude. As the morning sun finally touched the walls, Malik reached for the envelope. His hands trembled as he unfolded it and found a check inside. Not for a few $100s or a symbolic gesture, but a staggering amount that made his breath hitch. $50,000. Beneath it was a letter written in clean, steady handwriting. For Malik Carter and his mother, to cover medical care, education, and the chance to dream without fear. From someone who learned what real wealth means because of you. It wasn't signed with the flourish of a CEO, just a single line. Thank you for reminding me how to listen. Malik stared at the words until they blurred. His throat tightened as he clutched the paper to his chest. All the nights of worry, all the quiet prayers whispered into cold pillows, all the hunger and exhaustion that had taught him to stay strong, they seemed to dissolve in that single moment. He looked at his mother, still sleeping peacefully, and whispered, "Mama, you're going to be okay now." When Angela awoke, Malik told her everything. At first, she refused to believe him. She had seen too much of life to trust miracles that came wrapped in envelopes. But when the hospital's financial officer arrived later that morning to confirm that an anonymous donor had already cleared her outstanding bills, Angela broke down in tears. The weight that had sat on her chest for years, not just illness but the fear of leaving her boy alone, finally began to lift. For the first time in a long time, she let herself hope for tomorrow. Across the city, Adrian sat in his office overlooking the skyline, his phone buzzing endlessly with calls from investors, board members and analysts demanding his attention. But his mind was not on profit margins or quarterly reports. It was on the small hospital room he had left behind. He thought of Angela's frail smile, of Malik's eyes that carried both childhood and wisdom, and of the strange peace he had felt standing in that room, a peace his penthouse had never given him. He found himself wondering when the world had taught him to confuse wealth with worth. His wife Jaime had once warned him of that very thing. "Adrian, don't build a world where people can't afford compassion," she used to say. He hadn't understood her then, but now, in the echo of that boy's quiet strength, her words found their meaning. Days passed and Adrian couldn't shake the feeling that helping once wasn't enough. He didn't want to be another man who appeared for a moment of kindness and vanished when the story was over. He wanted to be part of Malik's future, not as a savior, but as someone who believed in him. So one morning, he picked up the phone and called the hospital. "Can you have Malik and his mother meet me tomorrow?" he asked softly. "There's something important I want to discuss with them." The next afternoon, Malik and Angela arrived at a private medical facility downtown. Their clothes plain but clean, their eyes uncertain but hopeful. Adrian greeted them himself at the door, not in a suit this time, but in a simple shirt and jacket. "It's good to see you again," he said warmly, shaking Malik's hand before gently helping Angela into a chair. "How are you feeling?" Angela smiled faintly. "Better than I have in months, thanks to you." Adrian shook his head. "Thanks to Malik," he corrected. "He's the reason we're all here." He paused, then turned to her with sincerity. "I've spoken to the doctors. There's a specialist in Boston who's reviewed your case. They believe a transplant could save you, and I want to cover everything. The surgery, recovery, even travel. No conditions, no repayment, just a chance for you to live." Angela's hand flew to her mouth, tears spilling before she could stop them. Malik's jaw dropped, disbelief painting his young face. "Sir, that's too much," he whispered. Adrian smiled gently. "No, Malik. Too much is when a boy your age has to carry the world on his shoulders. This is just what's right." For the first time in years, Angela allowed herself to cry openly. Not from pain, but from relief. She reached out and took Adrian's hand, squeezing it tightly. "You're an answer to a prayer I didn't think God was still listening to." Adrian swallowed hard. "Maybe he just needed a messenger," he said quietly, glancing at Malik. "And I think that messenger was sitting beside me on that plane." The following weeks were a blur of preparation. Doctors coordinated the transplant schedule, travel arrangements were made, and Angela's condition slowly stabilized under the care of specialists. Adrian visited often, bringing Lucas with him each time. The baby had grown stronger, his bright eyes lighting up every room. Malik adored him, often making him giggle with silly faces or softly humming that same old lullaby. It became their unspoken bond. A song that had once calmed the sky now became a bridge between their worlds. One afternoon, while Angela slept after a procedure, Adrian found Malik sitting in the hospital garden, sketching in a small notebook. He sat beside him, curious. "You draw?" Malik smiled shyly. "When I can find a pencil. Helps me think." Adrian leaned closer, studying the sketch. It was a drawing of a baby cradled in two hands, one rough and small, the other large and elegant. Beneath it, Malik had written, "Different worlds, same heart." The words struck Adrian deeply. "That's beautiful," he said softly. Malik looked at him, his expression serious. "You think people like us can ever really meet people like you? Not like rich and poor, but like real?" Adrian considered the question for a long moment. "I think," he said finally, "that the world tells us we're different because it's easier to keep us apart. But the truth is, real doesn't care about money. Real is when you see someone, really see them, and decide they matter. You did that for me, Malik." The boy looked down, tracing the lines on the page. "Then maybe the world just needs more people to listen." Adrian nodded, his gaze soft. "Maybe you're the one who's supposed to teach them how." The transplant came 2 months later. It was long, risky, and filled with sleepless nights. Adrian stayed at the hospital the entire time, pacing the corridor outside the operating room while Malik prayed in the chapel. Hours stretched into eternity until finally, the surgeon stepped out. Exhaustion etched into his features, but his smile said everything. "It was successful," he said. "She's going to be okay." The breath that left Malik's lungs felt like the release of years of fear. He collapsed into Adrian's arms, sobbing with gratitude. Adrian held him tightly, feeling the small boy's tears soak through his shirt. "You did it," Adrian whispered. "You kept your promise." When Angela finally woke, her first words were faint but full of wonder. "The light. It feels different," she murmured. Malik leaned over her, his smile trembling. "It's because you're still here, Mama. You made it." From that day, the hospital no longer felt like a place of endings. It became a place of beginnings. Adrian continued to visit often, sometimes with Lucas babbling in his arms, sometimes just to talk. And slowly a friendship grew, unlikely, genuine, and rooted not in wealth or gratitude but in shared humanity. Malik began to dream again, bigger than before. He spoke of becoming a doctor, not because it was a job, but because it was the only way he knew to repay the kindness he had received. Adrian promised him he would help him get there. "One day," he said, "you'll wear that white coat, and when you do, remember what your grandmother said. Blessings don't come easy, but they do come to those who believe." That evening, as the city lights flickered awake, Malik stood by the hospital window watching the skyline. His reflection stared back, older somehow, stronger. Behind him, his mother slept peacefully for the first time in years. Beside him, the billionaire who had once been just a stranger now stood quietly, looking out at the same horizon. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The silence between them said everything. That kindness had bridged the impossible distance between two worlds, and that the gift of tomorrow had already begun. When hearts remember, years slipped quietly through time's fingers as they always do, soft and relentless. Seasons came and went, leaving trails of memory like fading chalk on the streets of Chicago. The hospital where Malik once held his mother's hand through pain was now a place she walked through freely, her laughter echoing through the halls that had once known only the sound of machines. The heart that had once faltered now beat strong, steady, and full of life, a rhythm bought not by money but by grace. And every beat reminded her of the stranger who had become family, and of the boy who had never stopped believing that love could heal anything, even time. Malik had grown taller now, his shoulders broader, his eyes still carrying that same quiet wisdom, but now framed by the certainty of purpose. He studied harder than anyone, his notebooks filled not just with medical terms but with small sketches of crying infants, mothers, and hands clasped in comfort. The path to becoming a doctor wasn't easy. It came with nights where exhaustion blurred the words on the page and days where he juggled work, classes, and taking care of his mother. But he had learned from the start that nothing worthy ever came without weight. And whenever doubt whispered that the world was too heavy, he remembered the billionaire on that flight who had looked at him, not down at him, and said, "You made me a father again." Adrian Vale, too, had changed. The sharp, ambitious man who once measured success by numbers had become something gentler, wiser. His empire still thrived, but his heart had shifted its allegiance from boardrooms to people. He launched a foundation in Jaime's memory, the Vale Promise Initiative, dedicated to supporting children who wanted to study medicine but came from circumstances like Malik's. The first scholarship he created was named the Carter Grant for Compassionate Medicine. It was more than a tribute. It was a bridge between two souls who had taught each other that humanity was not a privilege, but a duty. As for Lucas, the baby who once cried through the clouds, he had grown into a bright, curious child, endlessly fascinated by the world. He called Malik Big Brother, and every time they met he clung to him with the kind of affection that comes from somewhere beyond memory, as if even as a baby he had recognized the boy who held him through pain. Adrian often smiled watching them together, realizing how life had come full circle, how one act of kindness had created ripples that would outlast them all. It was a quiet spring morning when Malik received the envelope. He was in his small apartment near the university, textbooks spread across his table, sunlight spilling over half-finished notes. The envelope was thick, sealed with the insignia of the Vail Foundation. Inside was a letter written in Adrian's elegant hand. "Dear Malik, you once said blessings must be earned with patience. I think you've earned more than any man I've known. You're graduating soon, and I'd like to offer you a position at the Vail Children's Hospital, a place built from your courage and my gratitude. I believe it's time for you to help others the way you helped me. The world needs more healers who listen with their hearts." Malik's hands trembled as he read. The hospital, Vail Children's, had been under construction for years, funded entirely by Adrian's vision and named in honor of Lucas's mother. It was a sanctuary for children whose families couldn't afford care, a place where no one was turned away because of money. Malik had followed its progress from afar, never imagining he would one day work there. He read the letter again and again, the words blurring into something holy. He pressed it against his chest and whispered, "Thank you, sir, for believing." The day of the opening arrived like a sunrise the city could feel. The hospital stood gleaming, tall and warm, its glass walls reflecting the soft gold of morning. Inside, music played quietly as families gathered. Doctors in white coats lined the hallways and children laughed. Real, unrestrained laughter that filled every corner like a hymn. Adrian stood near the podium, older now, silver threading his dark hair. Lucas beside him in a small suit that made him look like a miniature version of his father. Cameras flashed, reporters murmured, and yet, when Malik walked through those doors wearing his first white coat, the world seemed to pause. He didn't walk like someone honored. He walked like someone home. Adrian's eyes met his from across the crowd, and for a moment, all the noise faded. He saw not the boy from the plane anymore, but the man that boy had become, strong, gentle, and unbroken by life's cruelty. When Malik reached him, Adrian smiled, his voice trembling as he said, "Welcome home, Dr. Carter." Malik's throat closed, his vision blurring as he took Adrian's hand. "You kept your promise," he said softly. Adrian shook his head. "No, Malik, you kept yours." The ceremony began with speeches about innovation and progress. But it was Malik's address that people remembered, not because it was rehearsed or eloquent, but because it came straight from the heart. He stood before the crowd, his mother sitting proudly in the front row, Lucas beaming beside her, and said, "Once I was a boy sitting on a plane where people thought I didn't belong. I didn't have much, just a song my grandmother taught me and the belief that kindness still mattered. That day I met a man who had everything money could buy, but who taught me something money never could, that no one is too high to learn, and no one is too low to teach. We both discovered that the smallest act of compassion can change everything. This hospital isn't built on wealth or charity. It's built on that moment, on humanity." There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Even the reporters put down their pens. Adrian looked at him with quiet pride, his hands clasped in front of him, his son's small hand in his own. And as Malik stepped away from the podium, Angela rose to her feet, her applause the loudest of all. Her heart, once frail and borrowed, now beat strong enough for two. As the sun dipped low that evening, Malik stood outside the hospital garden where the air smelled of fresh blooms and clean earth. Lucas ran through the grass laughing, chasing bubbles that shimmered like fragments of dreams. Adrian joined him, his smile soft, his eyes distant with thought. Malik watched them for a moment before speaking quietly. "Do you ever think about that day? The flight?" Adrian nodded, his voice heavy with emotion. "Every day. It's the day I stopped living like a man who owned the world and started living like one who belonged to it. Malik smiled faintly, looking at the horizon where the city lights blinked awake one by one. It's funny, isn't it? How everything can change in one moment. One cry, one choice, one act of kindness. Adrian glanced at him, his expression thoughtful. Maybe that's how miracles work. They don't come as thunder or fire. They come as people, ordinary people, who do something extraordinary without even realizing it. Silence settled between them again, comfortable and full. The sky turned to velvet, the stars stretching their silver arms across the dark. Malik looked up and whispered, "Grandma used to say that every time a heart learns to love, another star lights up." Maybe she was right, Adrian smiled. Then the sky tonight belongs to you. They stood there for a long time, a billionaire, a doctor, and a child. 3 lives bound forever by a single moment of compassion that had once taken place 30,000 feet above the ground. The laughter of Lucas echoed like music, and somewhere deep inside that night both men knew that their story was not one of wealth or debt or rescue. It was a story of 2 hearts that found each other across the impossible divide of circumstance and reminded the world that kindness, quiet, humble and real, still had the power to heal everything broken in it. And as Malik turned to head back inside, the lights of the hospital glowed behind him like a beacon in the dark. The sign above the entrance read, "The Vale Carter Center for Healing Hearts." It stood as a promise that love, when given freely, never ends where it begins. It travels, it transforms, and sometimes, if you're lucky, it takes flight.